very much. Vanessa, thank you so much for your introduction. And for those colleagues who don't know me, I'm Corinne Pluchino. I'm Chief Executive of ACRE. I joined the organisation about 18 months ago. And was just saying before we started the meeting formally, I'm so sorry I couldn't come to the European Parliament. I've heard such good things about the ERP and hope very much to come to the next one. But on this call, I have two colleagues, one of whom was there, which is Patrick Mahon, who you will see on your screen. Patrick is our Head of Policy and Public Affairs, and Deborah, who is our Rural Evidence and Village Halls Manager, Deborah Clark, who I know some of you have known for a little while now, and they'll be chipping in at various points during my presentation. I should also give apologies. I'm dreadfully sorry I have to leave at 11. The reason is I'm going to attend an online meeting with the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, our government department that has lead responsibility for rural matters, for a briefing on some changes to the deprivation statistics in England and therefore how they are being applied in rural areas. And we'll come on and talk about that a little bit in a moment, because as I'm sure you'll appreciate, that's a really key issue for us at ACRE and for our members. So I'm going to share a few slides if I may. So I'm just going to bring those up for you now. We tested this earlier, so I'm hopeful that it will all work according to plan. If someone could just shout when you could see them, that would be very helpful.
It's great. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good. A success. And as Vanessa said, but I think it's perhaps just worth repeating, ACRE and the ACRE network focus on England. We do not focus on the United Kingdom as a whole. There are other organisations working in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and we have varying degrees of contact with them, and indeed would love to develop those relationships further, because although the devolved governments in those areas have their own agenda, there are also, of course, similarities and opportunities for collaboration. So this is what I thought I'd cover with you. I know some of you do know ACRE and the ACRE network, so I won't dwell on this for too long. But Vanessa, I was interested in some of your opening comments, so I might talk a little bit more about the structure and why we are as we are. I then thought what might be interesting is to share a few points with you about our new strategy, which we published in July, because it's enabled us, I think, to do a number of things in terms of deciding where we want to focus as an organisation, how that interacts with our network, and also some of the issues that we've got on our radar screen. And we thought that might provide a nice basis for some discussion later on. So without further ado then, I don't need to tell you about the complexities of rural communities. There are some really interesting cultural issues, I think, concerning the countryside in the UK, but particularly England. We have a very long tradition in England of seeing the countryside as a rural idyll. A lot has been written about this. There is a lot of academic literature, but I think it stems back in part to two things. We, of course, had an earlier industrial revolution here, one that was quite brutal in many ways in terms of the way we saw the development of cities and conurbations. And the countryside was always seen as the sort of the antidote to that, the place that was clean and fresh and natural in contrast to the city, where, of course, there was a lot of very visible deprivation. Secondly, the countryside is very much a part of our art, our literature, our theatre in England. And so there is this concept that what goes on in the countryside is all good news, and it's the urban where the problems are. And that still, I think, shapes a lot of thinking today. It's also, of course, sometimes harder to see deprivation in rural areas. Patrick and I actually were at a really interesting event in the House of Commons last week, the publication of a report called Pretty Poverty. And the name was specifically designed to illustrate the point that in Cornwall, which of course is one of the most beautiful holiday destinations in the UK, that actually there is a lot of hidden deprivation there, but you don't see it because the landscape is so striking and so beautiful. So I've got here just a few of many statistics that we could share with you about how the rural experience compares to the urban. I wouldn't want to, though, give the impression it's all bad news in the country. Of course, there are comfortable and indeed wealthy areas as well. But even for them, things like access to services can be much, much more difficult than if one is living in an urban area. So that's a little bit of the backdrop that we're dealing with as we try and shape decision making in England. So a little bit then about ACRE, and I'm going to with ACRE and then talk about the network and then explain the relationship between the two. Our vision, as you see here, is rural communities that are thriving and inclusive and sustainable, and have the support that they need to ensure equitable outcomes for everyone. Now, what's interesting about ACRE is we are the only national charity in England that has this remit for looking at rural communities as a whole. There are other organisations that are looking at specific sectors of the economy, like, for example, the National Farmers Union. There are other organisations, of course, looking at specific issues such as homelessness or youth unemployment, as just two examples. But nobody is looking at that big picture apart from us in ACRE. And that makes us both unique, but also quite interesting to those who are keen to develop policy and other issues in rural areas. And our purpose, as you would expect, is very closely related to our vision. It's to achieve positive change for everybody, but particularly those facing the greatest needs and challenges as a result of where they live. Now, we've talked about the network, which is, I think, another thing that makes ACRE unique. And we're rather interesting in that the network preceded ACRE. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. As I think Deborah and Vanessa mentioned earlier on, some of our members actually now are over 100 years old. The oldest three are Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Gloucestershire, if you know your geography of England. And they actually emerged out of the interwar period when there was a real concern about unemployment in rural areas and some really, really extraordinary levels of deprivation, particularly after the First World War and as we went into the global depression of the 1930s. So actually those organisations were initially focused on adult education and on helping people to broaden their skills so that they had more employment opportunities. But with the passing of time, more ACRE members were developed. In those days, they were called rural community councils, and they evolved really over the next 3 to 4 decades. And the things that they did also changed as the society changed and as the economy changed in England. And even today, they focus on different things depending on the needs and opportunities in their areas. But they are unique and they give us this really fantastic, I suppose, line of sight into what's going on in rural communities. And that's fantastic for us in ACRE because it enables us to understand what's going on and report that back into government and to other stakeholders. So where then, you might ask, does ACRE feature in all of this? Well, about 4 decades ago, in fact, I think it's almost 4 decades to the letter. I think next year is the 40th anniversary. The rural community councils, who had previously collaborated on a number of different levels, thought it would be useful to have a clearly defined organisation that would be their national voice with government and with other national organisations and would also help coordinate their activities. And that's how ACRE was born. And that is still the role that we fulfil today. So we are closely integrated with our network. We are different, but we're the same. We're constantly collaborating and talking, and we'll give some more examples of that in a moment. And we also seek to support our members as organisations as they themselves evolve and develop. So you'll see here some of the things that we think make this relationship between the national and the local so important. They really do give us a very distinct USP in terms of the other organisations that are operating nationally. And they are real experts in their communities and are embedded in them. But what we have in common, even though they're all independent charities, is this really fundamental belief that communities are best placed to help themselves. In other words, the community development approach. And that is the most effective way to achieve lasting change. So moving on then, ACRE in numbers, a few facts and figures that we thought you might find helpful. So I'll just briefly touch on 1 or 2 of these. The first thing to say is our network themselves are then supporting organisations in their own communities. And that's where this extraordinary figure of 28,000 community groups comes in. So we support our networks support local organisations who are themselves delivering services. Some of our members deliver services directly to beneficiaries as well, but that reach that we have is I think, a really important and impressive statistic. The second thing I just wanted to point out was this £4.5 million figure, which has actually gone up to 5 million in the year that's just closed. We distribute a very, very substantial amount of money for DEFRA out into our network and into rural communities. So of the 5 million or so that we received from government for the year that ended in March, 85% of that went straight out our back door, as it were, to our members and to rural communities directly. We have other sources of income as well, and we want to diversify those sources of income. But we have a particular relationship with government, which again is quite historic in nature, and I won't go into the details of that now. But it's because really government over many years has dismantled a lot of the structures that it had for engaging with rural communities in England, and ACRE is one of the few mechanisms left that it can get funds out efficiently. And that leads me on to our village halls service, which is one of the recipients of those funds. And I'm going to very briefly pass over to Deborah, if I may. Deborah, if you'd be kind enough to just say a few words about the village hall service. It's special because we really have a unique expertise in England. There is no one else who has the knowledge we have. And I'm going to say the knowledge Deborah has, because I think that's true about village halls. But also, it's a nice example of one of the services that we support our network with. Deborah, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. Right, yeah, hi everyone. The ACRE delivers the National Village Hall Service. So we provide the service to our members, and our members deliver it locally. So we have quite a big opportunity within ACRE with our Village Hall service. We support the network advisors. We provide the guidance documents, the information sheets that they then send out to village halls, but we also provide internal documents for them to educate and train them. So it's a sort of a train the trainer situation where we make sure the network of advisors are trained so that they can go out and support village halls in the community. So our role is dissemination, and I think Corinne just pointed out that the members decided to create a national body for themselves, as it were. And therefore what that's meant is that the information about village halls and how you manage them is consistent. So it's not 38 organisations creating their own guide to doing a risk assessment. There's one risk assessment, and it's standardised. Everybody uses variations of exactly the same thing. So and we also offer one-to-one support for new advisors that are just coming into the network. The second role is what I call policy development and legislation. So we keep an eye on what's going down on the ground, and then we can collect intelligence and evidence from village halls, either to inform consultations or for us to inform DEFRA and other government departments, depending on what the issue might be. We've done a lot of work recently on the new Terrorism Protection of Premises Act, because that's going to impact on village halls in various ways. So just an example of how we work with government to help put regulations and guidance in place that's proportionate. I think if you've got a nightclub or a huge arena, you need to make sure that any legislation that's going to impact on that public building is not imposed on a tiny church or a tiny little tin hut that is the village hall in a rural community, because that's what can happen if you don't keep an eye on it. So the third area of work, just to sum up, is our programme management, and Corinne's already mentioned that. So we distribute grants on behalf of DEFRA out to village halls to do improvements to their building. We also run a loan fund so they can take up small loans. And over time, there's been all sorts of projects about all sorts of things, whether that's, we did a safeguarding project with the lottery. So lots of different types of projects that link into the work that we do. So, okay, is that quick enough, Corinne?
Perfect, Deborah, thank you so much. And as Deborah said, it's interesting that she sort of bounces between sort of really detailed support for village halls locally, most of whom, if not all, are run by volunteers, which is in itself a whole other issue. But she's also engaging with national government on things like terrorism legislation and trying to ensure that they are appropriately applied in a village hall setting. So it's a really contrasting and wide-ranging role. So that's a little bit about numbers. Let's then talk about our strategy. So in July, we published our new strategy, Rural Ambition, which sets out our strategic direction for the next 5 years. I'm sure ACRE has had strategies in the past, but it's a long time since we've gone through quite such a rigorous process as we did. And we felt this was worth doing, and our board felt it was worth doing, because we are living in such incredibly rapidly changing times. And it seemed a very good moment to take stock and to really stress test and think really robustly about who we are, what we're trying to do, and the gap that we're seeking to fill. So this is the overarching ambition that we've set ourselves for the next 5 years. Our strategy runs from 25 to 30. And as you'll see, it's intentionally broad. And that reflects, I think, that the contrasting work that we do, from this policy work nationally through to the work that we do at local level with our members. And we will be putting some metrics around this so that we can ensure that we do make progress. And this essentially is our strategy in a page. So what I thought I would do is walk you through the key elements. So you can see there at the top our ambition, which I've just referred to. The next thing that we spent quite a lot of time thinking about is, okay, so what are the activities that we are going to undertake in order to achieve that ambition? I should say we've not gone back to the drawing board for this. We have built on many years of successful work. But what I think we have done is perhaps consolidated a little bit, and I think also enabled ourselves to articulate a little bit more clearly what it is that we are doing. What are we contributing? What is the difference that we're going to make as an organisation? And we're going to do it through these 3 areas of activity: campaigning, enabling and unlocking. And I'll say a little bit about the 3 of them. We have always done advocacy and engagement work with government, but what I think is really interesting is that we're now going to think of it in terms of campaigning. And that's a subtle shift, but I think it's a really important one, because what it signifies is we're going to be bolder in the way that we talk, both to government and to outside organisations, both directly and through the media. And what was really interesting to me when we went through this process, and we did a lot of consultation, both in and outside the organisation, is people want us to have a bolder voice. So that's something we're going to be working up over the coming months. Next, we want to enable local communities to take action to help themselves, and we'll do that both through our members and also trying to create a policy and resource environment which enables rural communities to help themselves directly. And then the third point is this unlocking piece. And this is about trying to secure specific opportunities for rural communities to access resources, be they investment, services, or opportunities for growth, but with a particular focus on those in need. And we run a programme at the moment that I think is a really nice example of that, which is called our Rural Housing Enabler Programme. And that is all about trying to ensure that rural affordable housing that meets local need is more easily accessible in local areas. So those are our 3 areas of activity, and woven through all of that is work with and support for our members. And then finally at the bottom, you've got these pillars, and these are essentially the things that we need to have in place if we're going to deliver our activities and achieve our ambition. And again, I don't know whether these are things that preoccupy you in your own organisations, but we need to be resilient as an organisation, and finance is a fundamental part of that. We want to be more proactive, and we want to be able to plan better for the medium and long term. And to do that, we've got to be more financially resilient. We want to help our network members to be strong, and financial resilience is certainly part of the story for them. But in other areas as well, we want to ensure that they're robust and they can also address the need they want to. We've got a big job to do to increase the profile of rural. So I talked a bit earlier about where where the country sits in the English psyche. The most popular programme on British television, or certainly it was until perhaps a year or two ago when we had things like The Traitors, is Countryfile. It's a programme that's on BBC television on a Sunday night. And it's a programme of about 45 minutes, which looks at farming, it looks at countryside matters. It's massively, massively popular. But there are very few programmes like that that really look at the challenges facing rural communities. We've got a big job to do there, particularly amongst policymakers who are very, very heavily focused on the urban. And then finally working in partnership. And we want to be more imaginative about who we work with. We have very, very good relationships with other national rural organisations, but guess what? We all agree with each other. So what we need to do now is to start building new alliances, I think, with organisations that are not antagonistic to us, but perhaps haven't really thought about us and who might be more willing to engage if we could tell the story. And you might say, well, what kind of organisations do you have in mind? And that brings me on to this. I'm going to pass over to Patrick in a moment to talk a little bit more about this. But in summary, one of the decisions we made in our strategy process is we got to focus on less. Because we're a small organisation, we have 9 members of staff, but they're not all full-time and they're all doing different things. So if we're going to get traction at a policy level, we got to focus on fewer activities. And these are the priorities that were identified by our members. I have to say they're all still big subject areas, and they've all got a lot going on, particularly with our government here at the moment in the UK. And you'll also realise that they're interrelated. But what we want to do is to build new alliances with organisations that have strengths in those areas, as opposed to being rural organisations. I'm going to pause for a moment and hand over to Patrick, who's going to talk to you about a couple of these and some of the work we're doing. Patrick, over to you.
Thanks very much, Corinne. Before I start, just to say, I think I might have an unstable internet connection. So if I start sounding like a robot, tell me on the chat or something, and we'll try and sort it out. But just to pick up on what Corinne's just been saying, she's already mentioned affordable rural housing as a key priority, but there's a couple of others on this list of 5 here that I wanted to pick up briefly. The first of those is access to public services. And a particular issue here that I'm sure will be familiar to a lot of you in your own contexts is access to healthcare. Massive issue for a lot of people in rural England, simply because of the difficulties of physically getting to hospital. Now, interestingly, the new Labour government that's been in for a year and a half now, over the summer in July, it produced a 10-year health plan for England, which has 3 main priorities in it. The first of those is bringing healthcare more local to people. So it's about neighbourhood health centres that it's talking about. There's a big question mark about what neighbourhood means, and we're currently in discussion with Department of Health in London about what neighbourhood would mean for rural areas as opposed to what neighbourhood means for urban areas. But potentially this idea of moving healthcare closer to the patient by bringing it out to neighbourhood health centres is a really good one. So there's a potential win there if we can make it work for rural. A second issue, unsurprisingly, given that everyone's constantly talking about computers and digital and AI and everything, is how can the health service move from being an analogue health service that's done physically to a digital health service that's delivered via your mobile phone? And again, there's pluses and minuses there. On the one hand, if you can successfully deliver the health service digitally via people's mobile phones, then that's brilliant, because it means they don't potentially have to go to their local hospital if they can, for example, have tests done or have prescriptions sorted out via their mobile phone. On the other hand, and again, I'm sure this is very familiar for all of you, if your mobile phone doesn't work in your rural context because there's no broadband or the broadband isn't fast enough, then having a digital service is of no use to you whatsoever. So again, we're having discussions with Department of Health about how you make sure that access to public services in the case of healthcare works digitally for those people who might be digitally excluded, whether that's because of technology or because they're not that familiar or that confident with use of mobile phones or other digital equipment. And a third part of this policy platform from the government is moving from providing healthcare to solve problems after they've erupted to healthcare prevention, which is, again, clearly a very sensible idea. And there, what Deborah was mentioning earlier about our village hall service may be relevant, because quite a lot of our colleagues across our ACRE network are providing preventative healthcare services at village halls or in other community buildings, so that, again, they're provided much more closely to people where they are, rather than having to spend 2 hours on a bus to go to a 10-minute appointment at a hospital. So there's some potentially good and potentially challenging issues there on healthcare. And very briefly, the other one I just wanted to mention was the energy point, which is on the right-hand side of this slide. Now here, there's a lot of work going into building renewable energy infrastructure, so solar farms, wind farms, etc., to help the UK to move towards net zero, to move away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. However, if you build a wind farm or you build a solar farm, the energy's got to get to where it's going somehow. And so you have to build transmission infrastructure, you have to build the actual wind farms, you have to build the actual solar farms. These are all built in rural areas. And the question is, will the people who live in those rural communities who are having this stuff built around them actually get any benefit from it themselves? So one of the things that the government is consulting on at the moment, and which we have been talking to them about, is the way that potentially, if a renewable energy project is built in a rural community, can there be a requirement that that project provides some kind of financial or non-financial benefits to the local community who are hosting it? This seems a very sensible thing to do. Inevitably, the devil's in the detail, but be interested to know whether anyone else across ERCA and ERP colleagues are having similar discussions about how do you make sure that rural communities hosting renewable energy actually get some direct benefit themselves. And I think I'll stop at that and hand back to Corinne.
Patrick, thank you. And there were no problems with your internet, so thank you very much. So those are our big five, as we call them. It doesn't mean to say that we're going to ignore some of the other issues that we work on, but what we're going to try and do is brief other organisations who have the capacity on some of those things. A good example would be access to banking service in rural areas, which has become an acute problem in the UK, including in England, because the banks are all closing. But whereas we might have worked on that issue in the past, we're now going to work with other organisations who have more expertise in that area. Finally, we also have some cross-cutting themes. Patrick mentioned we got a new government. There is a lot of change associated with that new government. In fact, there isn't really anything that I can think of at the moment anywhere that isn't being impacted by government reform. And one of those is the reform of our local government structures. You may be aware that compared to many countries in Europe, England has traditionally been a very centralised governance structure. And our current government is keen to encourage greater devolution. But in so doing, it's also keen to remove some of the lower layers of local government. So essentially, we're seeing a situation where power is being devolved from London, but also some of the local representative bodies are being abolished. So we're sort of moving to more of a middle point, if you see what I mean. The big question there, of course, is where is rural going to sit in all of this? Because if we have bigger authorities, the likelihood is that the power and the interest will be such towards the urban. So what does that mean? Another big issue we've got, and I think we touched on this in the last seminar I attended with colleagues on healthcare, is data. We've got patchy data in England about rural experience, about rural quality of life, and the data that we have got tells some of the story, but not all of it, and is easy to misinterpret. And that's one of the things that's running through all of our work and will continue through our strategic period. And finally, it's this point that Patrick just made, which I won't dwell on, which is how can we make sure that as we see fundamental change in parts of rural England in terms of industrial infrastructure, how can we ensure that rural communities benefit from that? I'm going to stop there, but I did just want to say one thing, inclusion. Very early on in my time at ACRE, 18 months ago, ERCA published a paper, which I think came out of some conversations that you've had, but basically set out, and forgive me, I can't remember the title, I'm sure you will, but basically set out the role that it saw rural communities playing in the future development of Europe. It was a fantastic paper. It made an enormous impression on me, and influenced actually some of the thinking that went into our strategy. And I also shared it with some colleagues, some officials in DEFRA, the government department that we deal with the most. So I feel delighted to be part now of the ERCA family. I hope that was helpful, and I look forward very much to working with you in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, that was brilliant. Thanks very much, Corinne. I think what I like very much that you have a clear strategy, and you have also a clear way of presenting it. So that was very good to see. And there are some intriguing things in your presentation, but let me start by asking to everyone if there are some questions, because now we have you still on board. So who will start with the first question? And please mention your name and your country, then we know where you come from.
Thank you.
Sorry, put my hand up there, Ben.
Vanessa, yeah.
I've got loads of questions actually, but I could talk all day about it.
I'm very happy to be.
I suppose for me it's even more interesting because you are, part of the UK as well, and so Scotland is always comparing ourselves with what you do down there. I'm kind of interested in there's a lot of things that relate to this, but the relationships that you have but with other NGOs operating across England. Because in Scotland, we have very many. I mean, when we started Scottish Rural Action, we had 42 NGOs on our steering group to set up Scottish Rural Action. Yeah. Rural Forum Scotland have 30 that were actual council members of Rural Forum Scotland. So, for instance, with housing, we have a special organisation dealing with housing, etc. I don't know what it's like in England. And you obviously mentioned that you deal directly with housing issues. Whereas I guess in Scotland, we would probably go through the NGO that focuses on rural housing. Yeah. And the other question that I have is relating to funding. Where is all your money coming from? How much of it is from the government? And how much does that constrain your activities? Because you are nervous in some way, albeit you wouldn't explicitly be nervous about how government would react to some things like, for instance, campaigning on sensitive issues or that kind of thing.
Ben, should I answer each question as they come up? Would that work for you?
I think that would be good, yes.
Thank you. Vanessa, I'm going to start with your budget question, and then I'm actually going to pass over to Patrick. Patrick, it might be nice to share your experiences of the Rural Coalition with colleagues as an example of some of the collaborative working. But let's talk about budget. It's an important question. As Deborah will know, having been with the organisation much longer than me, ACRE's income has waxed and waned over time. Depending on what's been going on. We have, first of all, income from our members, so from the 38, and that's very important income because that is unrestricted. So we can use that in whatever way we feel is appropriate to deliver our objects and to deliver our strategy. The second and largest source of income that we have is that money I mentioned from DEFRA, which in the financial year that's just closed was not that short of £5 million. And that is linked to various initiatives and grants that DEFRA either wants us to distribute to our members who will then deliver, or we distribute directly out to rural communities. So Deborah, over the last 2 years, more than 2 years now, has been distributing a village halls fund. And then the final source of income we have is from corporate partners. That's a much smaller amount, but Deborah stewards those partners to support the village hall service. Two things to say. The first is the relationship with DEFRA is a really interesting one, and you're absolutely right to raise this question of, do we feel it constrains us? I think there's two things to say about that. I think first of all, obviously, when DEFRA gives us money to do a specific thing, we have to work within the bounds of the grant, as you would with any funder. So, you know, that is a constraint in as much as the funding is for a particular task to achieve a particular objective. But you're right, you could argue as well, how easy is it for us to push back against government if we're in receipt of government money? And I think maybe there's a couple of points I'd make in response. I think the first is we shared our strategy in detail with DEFRA when we published it. So I did a special briefing for the lead official who we work with, and I talked in particular around that campaigning piece, because, you know, exactly the issue you're raising was something I wanted to talk to him about. And I think he was relaxed about it. And I think their view is you have other sources of money. Don't use DEFRA money to campaign against DEFRA or to campaign against government, which is, you know, an established part of how we operate in the UK, and our charity law actually sets that down in legislation. But that's why our membership income is so valuable, because we can then, for example, Patrick isn't paid for from the DEFRA money, he's paid for from the membership fees. But of course, also, it's about using your voice judiciously, isn't it? And about knowing which battles to have when, and which battles to have behind the scenes, and which battles to have publicly. But we absolutely want to diversify our income. That is a top 3 task for us in the next year and beyond. And in fact, we've just started that work, because for all the reasons you would expect, particularly when public money is under pressure, we've got to move away, and so have our members, and we want to help them do that. Patrick, do you want to talk a bit about the Rural Coalition and how we deal with other organisations? Because we are structured a bit differently, I think, Vanessa, to you. So we don't sort of have a big steering group where we work a bit differently. Patrick.
Thanks, Corinne. Yeah, I mean, in particular, looking at the Rural Coalition, I mean, that's a coalition of 12 organisations with a you know, largely or significantly rural focus, who work together, who get together about 4 times a year to discuss issues relevant to the rural agenda. Includes, amongst others, us, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, CPRE, the National Association of Local Councils, which is an association that looks after the interests of parish and town councils, so the most local tier of local government in England, most of whom are found either in rural areas or in small towns. National Farmers Union, as might be expected, are a member of the Rural Coalition. Then there's people like the Royal Town Planning Institute, who are full of planners. The Rural Services Network, who are an organisation, again, of larger local authorities compared to those in National Association of Local Councils, but those who've got a very strong rural focus. And amongst others, National Housing Federation, who are a federation of those who build housing in rural areas. Now, that's a coalition that helps us to have a stronger voice across England on rural issues. And it regularly, twice a year, of its 4 meetings a year, 2 of those will be attended by the relevant minister, the Rural Affairs Minister from DEFRA. So we do, through that coalition, get a chance to directly put points to the relevant government minister. And that's a very helpful way of amplifying all our voices. And by working together, we can get more agenda points in front of the government than we would if we were all working as 12 separate organisations. I think that's probably the strongest coalition we've got going. But there's a lot of other organisations that we work with on rural issues, as Corinne's already mentioned.
Do the government DEFRA have a rural committee or something of that kind? We have in Scotland, you know, a sort of a contact group that they speak to all the time about rural issues.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Vanessa. You're sort of getting to the nub of some of the challenges that we've got at the moment. So this is really interesting for all sorts of reasons. So first of all, rural affairs as a subject area, as a policy area, sits within DEFRA. And we have actually some really good connections with some really genuine and committed officials there. In fact, the reason why Patrick and I are dropping off this call early is to join them for a meeting. So we have excellent relationships there. But DEFRA as a whole is largely focused on farming and food production and environmental protection. So that's the first issue, is we're quite a small square in quite a big department. But of course, the reality is that most of the policy areas, if you think back to those big 5 things I showed you, they're not delivered by DEFRA. They're delivered by other departments. So that in itself is really interesting, just in terms of where does the power lie and where did the decision making lie. So something that DEFRA actually launched earlier this year was something called the Rural Task Force. And it was designed to bring together rural stakeholders, of which we were one, with different bits of government to sit down and talk about key issues in the context of the Labour government's broader agenda. So we're waiting for the final report on that, which we're hoping will be useful in taking a number of contacts and initiatives forward. But Patrick, I don't think we have an equivalent of what Vanessa's talking to, do we? Because I think if we did, we'd know about it. There isn't really an equivalent.
No. I mean, I think there are a few things outside of government that might help, such as, again, each department in Whitehall is shadowed by a select committee in Parliament, and so there's an EFRA select committee that shadows DEFRA, and that does from time to time hold inquiries on rural issues and discuss the issues with stakeholders. But that's as part of its wider business of holding DEFRA to account, rather than as a standing body.
But perhaps someone should explain a little bit DEFRA, because I looked into it, but it's not everywhere the same. I think this department.
Ben, I'm so sorry, Ben. That's my fault. So DEFRA, DEFRA, stands for the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
Yeah.
And DEFRA sits in the UK government and has some responsibilities which cover all of the UK. But it also has responsibility for rural matters in England. So we have this rather odd dual tier going on. Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, no, I think that's good.
It's also interesting hearing from other countries actually how their government structure their rural relationships. I mean, I know a lot about Finland, and they have been over the years one of the best examples in Europe, where they have this broad rural council which sits both between the civil society and the government, and the government are basically chairing, and that's been incredibly effective in Finland over very many years. I don't know where it's at the moment, but I don't know what other countries do about that link with government.
Well, I think an interesting thing would be, but it would be nice to go into that in on another occasion, I think, is that what you see now is that in more European countries, we are now trying to build up a rural pact, as it is called. William is engaged with that in Flanders, and I am engaged in the Netherlands. In Ireland is now some that's a way to bring all the partners together that are involved in rural development, but it's not yet settled as a real powerful board, I think. So there's a lot of work to do. So also in the Netherlands, there's not an equivalent of a place where rural affairs are really coming together.
In the Netherlands?
In the Netherlands, no, not yet. Yes.
No.
Is there, Louise?
Yeah, well, like we have a department separate from, like it is Department of Rural and Community Development, and the Gaeltacht have go into it, the Irish speaking and the islands. But like it's separate from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, but it's a relatively new department and doesn't get much budget. And again, it's kind of nearly overseeing a lot of the work. Not that it oversees it, but tries to bring together, I suppose, the work of other departments and how they're working in rural areas. Because and the recently developed guidelines that were issued to every department on rural proofing policies.
Oh yeah.
But I don't, and I know Sinead spoke at the ERP at or she just mentioned it at the workshop on roll proofing at the ERP, but it hasn't. We don't know yet how much kind of clout it has, or because they have such a small budget compared to other departments, and I suppose there is sometimes reliance on organizations like us, like Irish Rural Link, and there's other organizations to kind of push other departments that they use it, and sometimes they rely on us to advocate nearly for them as well. So while the department is there, how much, I suppose, influence to have compared to other departments can be quite small.
Yeah. William, you're muted, William.
I can see, yes. About the Flemish situation, as a matter of fact, we're only quite a small organization and not unlike ACRE, because we only have, about 100 villages which are amongst us, which was, already a big road, because 10 years ago we started from 16. We only have 2 half-time collaborators, but we are, sponsored or a part of VLM, which is translated the Flemish Soil or Land Organizations, and which is directly below the Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Environment. And for now, they have, during this government, they have all made all the kind of rural things which had to do with rural affairs brought under one ministry. And it was her plan also to start that big rural pact. Unfortunately, as Louisa said also, I'm afraid that the budget to work that out is rather limited for that. But our main organization, VLM, does, I think, as far as I know, is quite bigger. It was a kind of, let's say, coordination about all things which happen into rural affairs. They have direct links with the ministry, with the department, and also direct links with a number of sister organizations on a much bigger scale than we do, because, they simply have more means and more personnel to do so. So the coordination group, to answer to that to Vanessa a bit, I think if I have to know more, I have to go and get to my colleagues of VLM for that, which we, of course, closely collaborate with. We have regular meetings together, but they have asked us to take into hands everything which goes together with villages and growing also. That's one of us, or growing interests, and that's why it was interesting also to hear from ACRE those village halls, because that's something which is a very big concern in Flanders at this time, because unlike England, the whole of those organization of village hall is completely scattered. Some of them are by the village, other are organized by the parishes. And since parishes and power of parishes is rapidly decreasing, lots of the village halls are left alone, and we don't have that big volunteer, how shall I put it, urge and the fact we don't have any experience, and we don't have that big number of volunteers like I've experienced that, for example, in Holland and in England. It's completely differently organized, and we have less volunteers than you do have. So that's a big issue at this very moment. How would we organize and keep villages alive, and keep those village halls alive, because they're an essential part of community life. And I see you both nodding. I don't have to convince you about that. So
William, perhaps this is also an interesting moment to catch up with what you see in England, for instance, that like Deborah said, there is now a connection between terrorism and all these crisis management and the role of village halls is that in Flanders also already on the agenda?
No,
Oh,
not that I
okay.
know of. My colleague Kathleen de Rooster, she's also part of our board, is here present. I don't know whether she has any issue about that. I don't know, Kathleen, whether there is any connection. So far, there hasn't been any talk of terrorism and village hall, and as far as I know, that hasn't been a problem yet.
No, but okay, perhaps Kathleen, you want to say something about that?
No,
Okay.
I fully agree.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I know Patrick, it was also on the agenda in your ERP session, because in the Netherlands there's now also a discussion about where should a community assemble when there is a crisis, and that could also because of a flood. That doesn't have to be war, and that's an interesting entrance to bringing these village halls higher on the agenda. So that's perhaps later on Deborah or Patrick could say a bit more about that. But when they can we go into this first, and then your question, is that okay? Okay, Deborah, could you say something about that?
Yeah, I think it's all part of we have our local authorities have what they're calling resilience forums.
Mm-hmm.
So every county has they're called different things, but it's about resilience. So it's about finding places of safety in your community. So you're right, whether it's a flood or whether people need to come together. The halls were used in the pandemic, so that was another example of resilience. Or whether the hall is used for any other disaster or crisis in the community, and how it can be used, and therefore how that village hall then fits into all the various bits of legislation that come out of that. I think that's probably as simple as I can make it, because it's about communities coming together and being resilient within themselves.
And these resilient forums are already in an act or something like that. Every village should have one.
Do you know more about their structure, Corinne? All I know is that each local authority is set up, and the members of them tend to be the police and the fire and all the different services.
It goes back to a piece of national legislation, I think in 2004, Ben, something like that.
Okay.
But it's done at a county level, not at a village level.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting issue with that. Yeah,
that we notice in the Netherlands. Okay, that's fine. Wendy, you had also a question.
Yeah, a slightly different question, but maybe it connects as well, because I thought so intriguing in your presentation that you talked about we don't have a lot of capacity ourselves, so we need it from partnerships. And it's both probably from funding and capacity in terms of people. But what you said is we're searching for new partnerships who haven't thought about us, and maybe it could be unexpected. And I was intrigued on, in that search, what kind of partnerships do you discover which we not generally think about?
So the first thing I should say is you may be thinking about this where you are. And funnily enough, I think our members are better at doing this at local level. But at national level, the example I use, because it's something that I happen to be working on, is let's take healthcare as an example. So in the UK, as I'm sure you have in Europe, we have a number of high-profile, well-financed patient organisations. We have Cancer Research UK, we have the Stroke Association, we have the Alzheimer's Society. These are big, well-funded organisations doing, I should say, excellent work, and looking at the world through the health prism, as you would expect. Now, traditionally, we have not engaged with those organisations nationally. We've come at rural health through the rural channels. But what we want to try and do is go the other way around now and talk to these organisations who are very interested in rural. They have patients and they have donors sitting in rural communities. And what we would like to do is to talk to them and say, have you thought about the very specific challenges in rural? How can we work together using your knowledge of specific disease areas or specific issues and our knowledge of the rural? How can we combine forces? Because some of these organisations are very, very influential in the UK with the Department of Health. I used to work in healthcare some years ago, so I suppose it's the one I fixated on. They are very, very powerful. They are organisations of multiple, tens, hundreds of millions of pounds. They have resources, they have expertise. So my thinking is, if we could build a relationship with them and say, have you considered running a rural campaign? Have you considered how you can join us in talking to government about the importance of access to rural healthcare? I'm trying to sort of look at things from a slightly different prism. Now, at local level, I think our members are doing a lot more of that stuff. Nationally, we've tended to talk to more rural, and I don't want to stop that. I just think there's an opportunity to expand it. So that's the sort of thing we've got about. Ask me in a year if it's working.
Yeah. No, and I think what the thing about terrorism and crisis management is also that way builds different partnerships, because what you're looking for in the way you speak about it is what are the strong partnerships nationally, and can we embed the rural policy, etc., into that?
Louise, forgive me, it's just gone 11 o'clock. I'm so sorry, I've got to go. I would have loved to have continued the conversation, and I hope very much to become more involved. It's such a pleasure to meet colleagues from other places and to learn from you. I hope that was helpful. And if I don't see you again, very happy Christmas.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Corinne.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Patrick, you also have to leave, or can you stay? Okay, thanks also to you. I think we had an interesting thing. Just one sentence about this. In the Netherlands, we see now that NGOs are trying to build really one big coalition. We do it together. That's how the coalition is mentioned, and also to join forces to influence, for instance, policy on the national level and so on. But perhaps I can go back for a moment. Stefania, I saw you did put something in the chat. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit. It's also about this resilience on the local level, I think.
Yeah, I heard when you were talking about the village halls. This is something we don't have in the same form here in Iceland. We mostly have it. If you need information, you go to the municipality's office and get it there. And our organization, like some of you know, is not really connected very well with the government because we don't get any funding, and we always are the one trying to knock on the door when we need some information. But we are taking part in a program that we call Coming, Staying, Living with Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. And part of it is webinars that we have. We have one in each country, and last month, no, I think it was in this month, and we had a webinar in Finland. It was about village security, and when you were talking about that, it could also be good to have the village halls as a base for floats and other part that it is not just war.
No, right. Yeah,
they have done a really good program on how to do this, and they are implementing it into the. So there's a lot of slides on the YouTube form that I sent in. It was just I just remember this when William was talking about that it could also be float, so it would be could be interest for you to listen to this webinar.
Oh, thanks for sharing. I think
and Rina that you know from Finland.
Yeah, of course, yes.
She knows everything about it because she was the one to present it.
You know, it's interesting to. That's why I go a little bit more into this. But you also see on the European level and on the national level, and when it's about sharing, dividing the money. And the struggle to have enough money for the rural, because defense and village security is a big issue. So if we have the right arguments to also make clear what rural areas have an important role in this resilience or village or security, then these are also important arguments right in these times, I think. Also because of the discussion about funding.
The problem in Iceland really is that the government is the one that runs the department that is Byggðastofnun is the name of it, Department of Rural Living, and we don't really have any connection with grassroots. They don't really, so the government is not financing our organization in any way. We are the one that is trying to, and we have been, this is not a young organization. It was founded in 2001. And it did get some finance until 2008 when we had this problem in Iceland, financial crisis, and then we haven't got anything after that. So what we have, how we finance the organization is through taking part in projects throughout with partners, and as we all work voluntary work, then that means we get some budget into our, we get the finance into our budget that way, but that means we don't have any money to distribute through our organization that we had, that was the one that founded this one. We had 19 organizations in the beginning. Today, I would say there are maybe 2 that is really up and going, and mostly we are just persons that were part of the old organization, and we have the backing of them. We know the persons in our area, and we just use that connection that we have. But the work that you were talking about here in England from over 100 years, this is not something that we have in Iceland. And maybe it is, as we are not part in EU, that maybe that is, we lack the structure that the government needs to have as a part of that organization. But then again, who knows?
Yeah, we will all come to help you on this, Stefania, like you know. But for instance, Vanessa can tell more about that, but don't know. For Norway also doesn't have such a NGO like we are, so that's and still it's a country with a very strong rural strategy, I think. But William, you want to add something?
To come back on what Stefania has said, it's an interesting path of thought, and also what you mentioned, Ben. The fact is that the budget of defense, like in many European countries, has increased, and they have promised that not the whole budget increase of the budget would go to the military, but also to rural and local and strategic places. And in that role, it could be interesting that you say that village halls can play a certain role in that. Unfortunately, we do have the problem that defense is a national affairs, and the budget and everything which is rural and villages is a typically Flemish affair. So it's another ministry, so that would be a problem. Another thing I was thinking of, an issue which has been going on for some years now here in Belgium, that is sorry for the difficult word, but I think that's the word, the desacralization of communities, in the sense that there are lots of churches which start to become empty and not being used, and there is lots of thought, and it costs quite a lot of money, and there's lots of thought of how are we going to reuse these churches. And I think that is an interesting way, combining that with those village halls, using the churches as a kind of village hall, but giving them a multi-use also in case of calamities, in case of emergencies. And so I think this could increase the importance of having village halls, whether it be in a church or in another building, and also to enhance the public awareness of that, and coming out with that, the money for that. I think that it's an interesting idea. I bring along from this meeting when we'll be talking next time about village halls and the use of churches. That's what I add.
Well, also, as you know, NATO wants to say to raise the budget to 5%.
Yeah.
But what this is 3% is really defense, and 2% is infrastructure.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Okay, Vanessa, you wanted to.
Yeah, a fascinating discussion actually, and obviously we're in times of change. We never thought about security like we're doing at the moment.
No,
right,
no, we didn't.
Hopefully that won't go on for much longer, but you never know. Yeah, and I'm amazed actually that Iceland, with such a tiny population, you say that your government is far away from the people. You know, that's incredible. You know, England has got how many people in England? I know 60 odd million or something, and you've got I don't know what 250,000 or something like that. Or anyway.
No, Vanessa, it's not that the government is far away from the people. It's they don't think there is a need for having an organization, and you don't really need to talk to the people, because if people, they just knock on your door and tell them what they want to know, but there's no structure for it. So in many of the smaller villages, people just go to the mayor and they just say we need this and we need that, but there's no following up for it, and that's one of the reasons they don't. They think the connection is great enough.
I had one. The reason I put my hand up is I had one more question for Deborah. It was mentioned, I think, in the presentation about the change that the Labour government are proposing in England about the local levels of local government or something. I mean, this is a perennial subject for me, because I think that if the power doesn't lie at the local level and the money doesn't lie at the local level, it's so much harder for rural communities to do what they want. And I know in England you have these things called parish councils.
Yeah.
Is the Labour government threatening those in some way, or what did she mean when she said that?
No, it's not parish council level. It's our local authority. So our we have county, the local authority for the county, which manages all the local services for the whole of each of the 38 counties. So yeah, I think she used the word devolution. So a lot of the councils, I mean, are joining together. So instead of, for instance, the county that I live in has three or four different county councils that manage all the services for their area. But to save costs, they're pushing all the county councils together. So the county will have one local authority, not a local authority for its area. So some of them have absolutely massive, what they're calling unitary authorities. And yeah, our members are quite concerned about, the impact of the service onto rural areas.
You should be extremely concerned about that, Deborah. We have that in the Highlands of Scotland. We had 8 county councils in the Highlands of Scotland. Now, many years ago, they were all amalgamated into one huge local authority. It has been so problematic. You must really fight that as hard as you can.
Well, I mean, it's actually happening, Vanessa. So
you can't
the
do
fighting
anything.
is done. We're just trying to, our members are just trying to work with them.
Because I think, I mean, this is an issue that we should talk about more, I feel, structure of local government and its impact on our rural communities. It's different in every country. It's not understood in rural areas how critically important it is that there is power and money at local level, and because all of the governments sit in the middle of cities, they don't think rural, so therefore they don't realize the impact of doing what, for instance, is happening in England at the moment. And it's something that we also need to fight, very hard. Norway is the exact opposite. They have an amazing structure and they keep trying to amalgamate, but they haven't succeeded doing much of that yet. So they have just the opposite system, where everything goes to the local level. And what a difference it makes to rural areas, and I think we fight all the time about these things, but actually it's all about where the power lies. And this, it limits what we can do as organizations.
Yeah. Okay, just to go a little bit to wrap up, also, are there any other urgent questions now for ACRE and for Deborah? Is anyone have
It was
still.
really intriguing to hear how you organized it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And
Thank Colin.
impressive numbers also. And I think there are so much. No, it's really interesting how it is. But before we come to a wrap up, are there people who want to mention another issue that is not so much on ACRE? Kathy, I see you are from an organization, Community Resilience. Could you tell a little bit more about your organization? Cassie Dalton, I see you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Kathy. Hi.
Yes, I'm from Northern Ireland. Very much new to community resilience in Northern Ireland. The local, we are regional. So it's the regional community resilience groups implemented a new project called Building Resilience in Communities. So we're very much looking at how to prepare our local communities, in the first instance, ones that have suffered at the hands of a flood event.
Yeah.
So we're looking at how to build resilience within communities, not only to prepare for floods, but other emergencies that they may occur. It could be hot weather, it could be cold weather, storms. So all this is very new to me, but very interesting session this morning to learn how ACRE organise their village halls and how possibly here in Northern Ireland, our village halls could be used, or community centres could be used in terms of emergencies. So thank you very much for that.
But very interesting what you're working on. So perhaps you should also come back to that at any time, I think. Any other people? Anita Hurley, could you also say a little bit about you and your organization?
Yeah, sorry. I thought it started at 11 as opposed to 10, so I've missed most of it.
Oh, okay.
I'd went to join in at 10, and then it brought me through to the page to re-register again, and that I wasn't looking at the right place to actually join. And then I thought it was 11. So, but I'm from an organisation called Cookstown and Western Shores Area Community Network, and but there's 9 rural support organisations across Northern Ireland to support rural community groups.
Yeah.
So we would kind of be what we say, rural community network. If you're thinking of a pyramid, rural community network would be at the top, and then we would be the sub-region under that, which would include, we cover roughly each council area within Northern Ireland.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, that's good.
We would be advocating on behalf of the rural community groups within our local areas.
Yeah. Oh, great. And I think, Harris, could you also say a little bit about you and your organization? If you...
Ben, I'm so sorry. I just logged in with LDNet Zoom account.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. We were experimenting with Harris in the morning.
Okay.
So it's me, Nestle. I'm so sorry for that.
Okay. Yeah. No problem.
Okay. I just changed my name.
Ralph, is there news from the Netherlands or from the south of the Netherlands? I think you are also very active in this village hall issues, isn't it?
Ralph Tangelde. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm from the Dutch province of Limburg. That's one of the 12 provinces, and we are also a member of the Dutch Association of Small Villages. So we're one of the sub-regions, so to say. Well, yeah, a lot is happening already. Randy and Ben told something about it, about the call for emergency centers, so to say, and we are now discussing with some of the villages if there is some interest to participate, because every municipality has to look for places in the villages and in the towns where people can gather if there is an emergency, and we are now discussing with the members of the board members from those community halls, village halls, whether they are applicable or what has to be done to make them some kind of an emergency point or something like that. But it's all very new, so there's a lot of discussion going on at the moment. Because in what you already told, in a couple of years, the whole situation in Europe has changed remarkably. And well, the point of security is really a topic at the moment, but a lot of people haven't thought much about it. So we also just received from the national government a booklet, what to do in times of emergency. So it's all very new. But I can remember I was with you in the end at the beginning of this year. There was also a presentation from Sweden, I think, and then there was already in the Nordic countries was a discussion going on about what to do in things of emergency. And here it was just the debate was just starting. So I think we're a little bit behind in that.
Yeah, perhaps I think because Stefania already mentioned that Finland is also very active on this. Perhaps we should ask Rina or someone to have to tell us a little bit more about these developments. Vanessa, you wanted to
well, we've got some of our members present. I kind of wanted to ask a question and also to tell you something about how you would like to see ERCA taking forward some of the discussions that were had at the European Rural Parliament, because I'm very conscious that we had 30 workshops about all of these topics, but most people we could all only go to 2. And has ERCA got a role in trying to, carry forward some of the discussions that were had at the ERP? And, if so, we need to think about which ones we would want to try to do that with, which are the most important. So, it's just an opportunity while some of the members are present, to sort of think a little bit about that. The other thing I did want to say is that talking to Tom this morning, I think we're going to be postponing the board meeting until January, because it seems so many people are so busy in December that it's not proving easy to get a date for the board meeting. So I will send out another doodle for a meeting sometime in January. Sorry about that.
Okay. But I think it's a general question about what's kind of information to share from the ERP. Can you be a little bit specific? Because do we mean that the reports on the 30 workshops should be some kind sent to our members, or how do you think about that?
Well, that will happen anyway. They'll eventually, all the ones we manage to get, and we won't get reports from every workshop, I don't think, but we're getting quite a lot coming in. They will be on the ERP website, and we will send a link to that, once all of that is on the ERP website. No, I was more thinking that, we've been today talking about several of the issues that formed the focus for individual workshops at the ERP. Most people didn't have the chance to go to those. So, from all of these different issues that we discussed, I mean, maybe what we should do is send out to our members a list of the workshops that were run at the ERP, which were based on what all of the partners of the ERP thought were the most important issues, and say, which of these would you like us to go forward with in terms of maybe running a webinar, or, carrying on more discussion about them, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's William?
Well, one thing, a couple of things I was thinking of in way of strategic communication, and that is one, if you send a list, the title of the list is not sufficient, because especially if you're foreign, you don't always understand what's exactly being meant by some of those long and quite complicated titles. So if with any title, 1 or 2 sentences just telling what that workshop was about will already clarify something. And 2, it might, if there is not, I think it's a very good idea of what you do, wanting to do, Vanessa, is sending the whole list. But as you often know, that right, you go to the conference, you're indulged in it, you get so much information, and then you come back and you have so many other things to do, and life takes on, and you tend to forget to take those important things along. It wouldn't be a bad idea that after you've done a survey, and if there is not sufficient response to that survey, we decide perhaps about from our own knowledge that by every now and then, for example, or in the WhatsApp group, or at our social media, you highlight one of the workshops, for example, that you say every week or every frequency to be defined, to take out just a link in the European conference. We did that workshop. We want just to highlight that one. And the chance of picking that up of people would think will be much greater than you, or bigger, than you would just put it on the website. Because, well, I don't always do it. We have a new and very good, and Louise is doing terrific work on that. A brand new website which is functioning good, but you don't have the idea of spontaneously going to a website unless you're searching for something. But often it occurs to me that what I get on Facebook or on Instagram or on LinkedIn, for example, on LinkedIn, on social media, oh, that's interesting, and you click to it, and then I think the results, the outcome of the fantastic work we've been doing there would be much greater if we try and do it like that.
Good idea, William. I mean, what I'm thinking is Scottish Rural Action, we're very good at sending out Facebook posts all the way up to the event, you know, saying, we're going to talk about this at the event, we're going to have this field trip. So we could do the same, you know, send out a Facebook post, even once a week, with a link to the report on the workshop, for instance, on the ERP website, you know, that kind of thing.
So short message, we did that. Remember, we did that on so that people and so you prolong and the result of the work is and the impact I think could be much larger on that.
Good idea.
Okay. Yeah. Perhaps this is also a good moment to catch up with two other things, and they are very much connected. The one thing would be, William mentioned it already, at the ERP we started a app group, a WhatsApp group with the ERCA called ERCA Lifeline, and I just would again invite you to all get connected to this WhatsApp, because it's a very simple and effective way to share knowledge. The other thing is,
if you want to, please just send a mail to Ben or me, and we'll add you.
Or Louise.
I think we should also ask our members, because, for instance, there's nobody in Scotland on that group except for me, because they were not, for some reason, in the room at the time or whatever. So there's a lot of people missing from that who should really be on it. So we might want to email all our members again and say, please, will you link into this group? Because this is one way of communicating.
We did that already, but it didn't deliver very much response. But we should repeat this message very much, like you say, Vanessa. That's very important. And the second thing would be, and that also connects to what Vanessa mentions, we are now building up our program for ERCA cafes or webinars in the next year. Because what we want to do is to go on with meeting each other on every last Friday of the month when possible, and for the next year there are in January and February we have two organizations which are already candidates to make their presentations. In January it will be Finland, and perhaps it is also possible to go into what Stefania mentioned then. And in February the LVKK, the Dutch organization, will present itself. And as for now, I think in September is our organization from Brandenburg will present itself. So there is also an invitation to everyone, if you want to be on one of the ERCA cafes to present your organization. Of course, William has already been there, and today we welcomed ERCA or ACRE, sorry. So that's a possibility. And another possibility is then going into this point that Vanessa mentioned. When we ask you what are the important things to talk about in our ERCA members, with our ERCA members, and is of course these ERCA cafes or webinars are an excellent way to do so. So I would add to the suggestion from Vanessa van these were the workshops at the ERP. Which of these is important for you, or should we go in deeper into that? but also then ask, and are you perhaps an organization that could help with this? Perhaps you have already some of these issues as an organization, like an important issue which you work on. For instance, like we mentioned ACRE mentioned, is housing is an important issue. And there are other members of us or other experts to talk about this. So yes, we could make this list, but I would like to add also the question: and are you? Would you like to also be one of the people that we build up then a webinar or something like that? And of course, Wendy, Louise, and we are the team that would like to organize these things, and we can help with that, and we can find other speakers. But it would be good when people volunteer to also make such a webinar, build up such a webinar. And for instance, I talked to also Brandenburg, because what I think, and I think Nestle, we will come back to that. One issue was, for instance, is the state of our democracy and the concerns we have about that, and that could also go about powers, like Vanessa said. So, and I think with Tobias, we want to try perhaps after the summer to build a webinar on that in October or so. So that's the way to assemble forces. So if you have suggestions for subjects, that would be great. It would be even greater when you say, and I want to help with that. I think we are now, we can close, and Vanessa can say some last words, and then we as the ERCA team will stay a little bit longer. For me, William, sorry.
Well, yes. Sorry, I had one question, and I think it's especially for Deborah. We're at the verge, in fact, of digitalizing and something which started from what we understood at the University of Gloucestershire with village appraisals. It's already quite some long time ago.
Long time ago.
Yeah, it's a very long time ago. We used that in Flanders, and yes, we used that. We translated that in Flanders, and we called it a village in view, dorp in zicht. But now we have the plans instead of that. It's all on paper, because it's often the start of a local community or a local group, and we had the plans to digitalize that. But we had, I would say, a bit of a problem with the license. We're quite sure that here in Flanders, Samo had the Dutch license for that, but the organization itself does not exist anymore. So before we move on, we want to be very sure that we're legally correct. Do you have any connections at the University of Gloucestershire, and somebody who we could refer to see whether everything is okay? I'm quite sure they will be very happy that they're all the
I think I can, William.
used.
I think I could also help, because Janet.
Oh yeah,
Janet Dwyer, who was at the ERP. She's the professor for the rural stuff, and she's well known to us. So
okay, well, and anybody. That's why I thought it was the question just cropped up in a mail yesterday. I said, well, I'll ask her. It's the excellent opportunity to ask her, because it was about ACRE and it was about Gloucestershire. I thought there would be at least anybody. So if anybody could send me those connections, I think it was in one per accident in one of the workshops with a professor or a former professor. Perhaps it's the same person. What was his name?
I'll send an email to both of you so that you can link up about it. William.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, Vanessa. And so we'll be quite sure. We don't know. We're still looking for the funds. We might work together with Prepare, because we do have a lack of staff, but it's definitely our intention to digitalize the whole project, and perhaps it can be useful if it occurs in other languages as well. it might be an interesting thing.
Yeah. I remember the project launching. Was it the sort of mid-90s, I think, originally?
Yeah, it's quite some time indeed.
Yeah, it was just when I started at ACRE. So
I've
yeah,
also
and it's the
worked with it, yes.
CCRI. There's a department in Gloucestershire University that I think Janet's a member of the team, and they're called the CCRI. So yeah, Vanessa can give you the details.
It was a brilliant project, actually, Village Appraisals. Really,
it was, and that's why we thought to renew it because sometimes it gives a start to lay the finger on the problems. What are the actual problems within a village?
Yeah. Perhaps, Wendy, it could be also connected to the EPCE program, but that's another thing. So let's wrap up. Vanessa, you want to say some last words?
Well, yes, and thank you so much to ACRE for a really fascinating set of presentations there. We never go as deeply into these things as perhaps, we would all like to because of lack of time, but it's brilliant to have actually exposed and profiled some of what you do there, Deborah.
Thank you.
And obviously, your roots and your links go far and wide, and also very long into history and deep into communities. So you're a very interesting example of a rural movement in Europe. And I think it's brilliant that we can hear a little about you. So very many thanks to ACRE for that.
Thank you. I'll pass the thanks on. And I think the only thing that I would add to that is that I'm actually really pleased that both Corinne and Patrick are really enthusiastic about ERCA and the ERP, and they want to get more involved. So I think you need to sit on that, Vanessa.
And also maybe we can eventually help you to organise a rural parliament in England, which I know you've tried to do many times.
That's
and
another
never succeeded.
story, Vanessa. We could talk for that for hours, but yes.
Oh, that would be great. Oh, they're all great ideas. Okay. So thanks.
Just to remind Ben, if Wendy, Louise and yourself could just stay on afterwards.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. Okay. So bye-bye.
We won't be seeing each other before the end of the year. A Merry Christmas and a very happy
New Year.
Yes. Oh, thank you,
That's about Christmas.
Yeah.